I know one of the questions I'm going to get asked is, how do I know where to mark my brackets or the tube so I know where to put the replacement brackets? Now, I'm only going to go into the lower control arm bracket and the spring perch. The rest of these are coming off, but the same concept can be applied here. So the first one I want to make sure that I have dead nuts is going to be the spring perches. These I have got to get right. So for me, the simple way to get this marked up for what I need is I take it, put it on my axle stand, I get a level. Right on top of the bump stop mount here, I'm going to take this level, I'm going to rotate the pinion until this is perfectly level. Once that's level, I now have a reference point that I can use to track back until I get my marks made. So what I need to do now is find the center of the tube. Finding the center of the tube can be a little bit tricky with this being level here. So what I opted to do is I take a T-square, a framing T-square here, I put it on one side, I take my level on top, I get it to match complete level like I did on top of the bump stop pad, and then what I do is I see where the laser line marks on the axle tube there, and it is showing 1 5/8 there. So I did it there, come back to the other side, do the same thing, get it leveled out exactly where I need it. And if it's not exactly level, then what I have to do is I have to go up top and take the laser level and move it. I can't move the axle because I need the perfectly flat as a reference spot for both sides of this axle. So I get my laser line moved until everything lines up. And then I go over here to the other side, I do the same thing, I get it all set up to where it is perfectly, these are perfectly level, and I have an exact measurement on both sides of that T-square on this side as well as that side, and everything is perfectly centered. So now that you can see, my laser level goes right along this line here, comes up over the housing, up the driver's side upper control arm mount here, back over to this spring perch, back down to this side here. So once I verify, and this is one where you want to double check, triple check, once everything is verified, I take a Sharpie marker and I just go right along that laser level right there. I go right along the spring perch, and the reason I do that on the spring perch is you're going to see this line here is offset. These spring perches don't go right exactly in the center of your axle tube. So I want to make sure I count for how much of an offset that is. So when I make my new spring perches, I account for that. I make a mark here. I make a mark on top of the housing. I made a mark over here on the tube. I make a mark on top of this spring perch, and I make a mark all the way out to the outside of that housing there. That gives me an easy reference point now. When I get everything all cut off, this mark will still be here, and that mark over there will still be there. The mark on top of the housing will still be there. Everything else will be cut off, and now all I have to do is line up my new spring perches to that. So one of the things I did was I measured how much the offset was, and in this case here, it is 5/8 of an inch. And when I made my spring perches, you'll notice that my mounts, the tube mounts here, are offset to the rear. That will allow this to line up exactly where the old spring perch was. I get it down there, and with me doing that as well, I went ahead and put a reference line right across, because these may need to be coped out just a little bit to fit better. But when I go to put this on, I'm going to make sure that laser line runs right along that line as it goes along the tube, and everything lines up. So that's how I did the spring perches. I think that is going to make life a lot easy once I get this cut off. I can grind all this stuff off without having to worry anything, because I got my marks right here, and over there. Once I'm ready to put this thing back, what I'm going to do is line up my my lines here, and I'm going to get it dialed in. Now, I'm going to tweak mine a little bit based on my suspension, so kind of take that with a grain of salt. I have a measurement of the angle of the face of the differential, so I know the relationship to this being flat here, or this being level here. That angle, I have that written down, so that way I know what the relationship is to these, because you could have this tube turned a little bit and still get your laser to line on stuff. It would just be a little bit more difficult without having that reference point. So when I come back, I'm going to put my angle finder on the face of the housing, get this number reestablished, then I know everything's going to be perfectly centered the way I want it to be centered. Let me roll this axle over and I'll show you how I'm going to do the lower control arm mount. With this rolled over, it's the same process for the most part, but instead of worrying about an angle that I'm at, what I did was I took the outside hole and I marked center of what that hole is. I did the same thing. Now remember, I'm going all the way to the outside out here, not this part, and I have it marked center on where that hole is at. So when you look right down the line here, everything else, these two brackets are going to get lined up. This one's a little bit easier because I move the axle stand now until those holes line up. Now I'm not sure if you can see in the video here, but the inside hole here, the line goes right to the this side of it towards me, right at the edge of that. And if you look over here on this bracket, it does the same thing. Remember, these things are in a line together. Everything should line up no matter where it's at, anywhere on the tube. So what I did to mark my new bracket is pretty simple. I just put it right here on the tube, and then you can see where I have lines drawn here. So this line is drawn straight through the middle of that hole, and I take this line until I measure it until it lines right up with that. And this is directly in line with this bracket. So I could take this bracket exactly as it is, move it all the way over here, set it back down, and it's going to be set exactly the same as this bracket. Now the inside hole here, the line goes right to the inside of that hole. Now the cool thing about this is, again, we're all on the same plane here with that tube being the way it is. So I can take the bracket for the other side, set it right here. But the one thing you're going to notice now is that this line comes to the inside. But remember, that's because this bracket over here, that's going to be the inside of the bracket. So what I'm worried about is the center line of the outside part of that bracket. So I can put it right here on the tube. It's going to line up with everything else. It lines up exactly where I need it. I make my marks on this, and I know exactly where that needs to go in order to get lined up for mounting. So I just want to make sure that I keep my marks on the axle tube. As you'll see, I have them right over the pumpkin here too. I do that so I have a great reference point when I set all this up, and it will be easy peasy when it comes time to weld these brackets back on. Thank God those Dana 44s don't weigh what that Super 60 does. I have all the brackets off of the axle tube now with the exception of the sway bar brackets. Those I'm going to keep and use. But let this be a lesson that you get a broken bolt off in one of these things, then it turns a simple project into a lengthy one. I had a broken bolt in here. I tried to heat it up. I welded a nut to it to try to back it out. Couldn't get the thing to barely budge back and forth. Eventually had to drill it out and then re-tap. So keep those things in mind. I would make sure that you have that resolved prior to moving on with anything else, because if you have to get new sway bar brackets to burn in, then that's another time eater as well. So getting ready now to put on the lower control arm mounts. You remember, I had these things marked based on the laser line. So when I took my axle and I got everything lined up prior to cutting any brackets off, I put marks here, I have a mark here, I have marks here along the pumpkin all the way across to the other side. And what that allows me to do is I can clock the pumpkin until I get this line to match up exactly the way it was before. So I could get the line going straight across, that's not a problem, but if I don't have it matched up to the pumpkin here, those brackets might be off. I just don't know, so I'm not going to take that chance. I'm glad I put these here because there was a little bit of confusion for me initially. I couldn't get stuff lined up, but once I clocked the pumpkin to line up with every single line, it makes everything just fit exactly where it needs to go. So remember, after I had the brackets, or when I had the brackets on there, I decided to go straight. Let me put this over here so you can see. Remember, on the outside, I went right directly in the middle of the hole, And that is going to allow me to line up the lasers based on that. So you can see here where the laser, and this is on the other side, it should be over here. But based on the laser, you can see how that line is going to line up exactly where I need it there. Same thing down over here now. I'm going to take this one, put it down over here, but I need to get it lined up with the laser on the backside right in the middle of the hole. And as you can see, that lines up the front line where that's at as well. Remember, the offset from this hole compared to the center line in this hole is because the bracket sits at a slight angle. So I want to make sure I get all those laser lines lined up and set. And then what I need to do is measure in. So the one thing I didn't talk about last time was how far in do I need these brackets. And when I was doing all that, I measured from the face of this flange here right to the center of the bolt hole here. And the reason I did that is because this bracket comes off at a slight angle. So I wanted to get something that was consistent and repeatable to measure from. So I took a straight edge right off the edge of the flange here, and I measured right directly to the center of the bolt back to the flange here, and I got 4 inches on these stock brackets. Remember, these are 1/4 inch brackets, so I want to account for that extra little bit of difference there. So I figured out what that was, and I made up the difference, and now I know exactly where these need to go this way as well as clocking them this way. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to tack them in place, see if everything looks right, make sure everything looks right and I'm not missing something, and we'll be able to burn them in the rest of the way. As you can see, I have my spring perches tacked in place. I'm only going to tack them in place right now because as I set this up, I want to be able to have the freedom of relocating those if I need to. You know, if I need to move them a little bit forward or back or something like that, I want to be able to have the ability to do that. So that way when I set up the mid-arm, I get those bump stops to line up nice and square where I need them to line up nice and square. Now, one of the things I want to do right now is put the truss on and get that burned in, but the problem I'm going to have is if I do that, you can see it goes right there. If I burn the truss in, how am I going to get my bulkhead fitting for my ARB established and all that? So I can't do this until after I get the internals done and have the bulkhead fitting for the ARB mounted and easily accessible. I got to figure out how I'm going to do that. So right now I am done with this part of the axle as far as just getting these tacked in place. I'm going to leave this off and I'm going to pull my rear axle now. I'm going to get all the internals out of that, start swapping everything over here, and man, I tell you what, I deserve this, but only because I hate doing it. I hate setting up used gears, but that's exactly what's going to happen here because I'm going from housing to housing. It will be taking those gears out of there, put them in there, but it's my beater rig. I really don't give a crap because I know I can fix it. With that being said, too, I'm going to be eventually putting in an automatic transmission, and when I do that, I'm going to have to re-gear for that anyway because that 32 RH needs a little bit less gears than what my 5-speed here does. So that's coming down the pipe. I should say way down the pipe right now. I just need to get this done by May because I'm going to Moab. So this is on my to-do list to get done right here. Before I move into swapping all my internals over, I just want to really quickly talk about this axle that I'm building here. You'll see I shaved some off the top. That's just to make sure it clears that truss. I didn't want to have any issues with that later on. One of the things I like to do, because it helps once you get underneath the Jeep and you're trying to get things centered and all that, is I mark the center line of the axle, and I put those marks out here so I have a reference point when I'm underneath. I'll determine what the center point is up underneath the bed, and then I can transfer it down to my axle and make sure everything is centered appropriately. Now, looking at the axle here, another thing I want to show you real quick, hang on, bear with me, is all this right here. You see all this nice shiny material here? That is all weld. If you look right there, you can see I was building up weld. You see this lip right here? It's a full 1/2 inch lip. It went all the way across. And when you get a big old 1/2 inch lip like that, you're going to get caught up on rocks when you're out there rock crawling and all that. So if you look at my old axle, which I'm draining the gear oil now, you're going to see how I am down to the last 1/16 of an inch on that bottom side. So when you look at my ring gear bolts, let me find the other one here. That's the ring gear bolt that I pulled out there, and you could see how close it is to wearing through. So as you drag over rocks, that's going to be common for all that material to leave. So if you take your time and you do a weld buildup like I did here. Now, first of all, I didn't build up a 1/2 inch here. I actually shaved, well, shaved's probably not the right word. I ground down a good portion of that lip prior to adding my weld material. And now what it'll do is when I run over rocks, it's going to act more like a ramp and slide over. Yes, it will scrape up the weld, and that's fine. That's kind of my sacrificial part of this axle. Build up all that weld. If it scrapes out pretty good, then I can always re-weld it later. So yeah, that's going to really help out a lot and keep me from getting hung up on things. So now that we're at this point, I have the gear oil drained overnight. So most of that's out there. I have to brake clean all the stuff out of there, and because I'm setting up my used gears, I need to run a pattern and determine where those teeth like to mesh. And I'm going to put it in this other axle and match that pattern as best I can. A lot of work today. I'll get all this stuff out of here, and eventually I'll be able to pull this axle out, and then we could start the mid-arm portion of this. But let's get this axle taken care of first. Because of the amount of work I'm doing, I decided to put it on time lapse on my GoPro just for the rebuild of the axle. I already have plenty of axle re-gear videos out there. I don't need another one to show you how to do this. Anyway, I'm getting ready to button up the pinion and I got the seal in, and I put the pinion in. I tightened it up with my setup nut that gets it nice and tight. Then I back it off. I clean up the threads, and then I put on the new pinion nut. As the old saying goes, you know, every 20-minute job is a 3-day ordeal away from a broken nut. And not that this was a 20-minute job, but I put the pinion in, drew it down with my setup nut. I grabbed another nut right out of my supply box there, and it's the wrong nut, wrong thread pitch. It started to screw on, didn't think twice about it because I keep everything separated for that fact. Started driving it home with the impact wrench, and I'm like, why is it not moving? But it was getting hot, so I knew to back off right away. What a freaking mess, man. I tell you what, so now I'm looking, and I don't know what, but you can take a look here, and those are the threads from the wrong nut, and these are the threads on my pinion. So they're all chewed up right now. I don't know. I don't think so. I don't know if there's enough threads left to even try to draw it on with something else. I'm trying to go to Moab in May. I want to do an automatic transmission swap where I'm going to have to redo the gears anyway. So I don't want to have to buy another ring and pinion set just to get me through to May, and then another one after that when I swap to an auto. So I don't know exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to try to probably clean these threads up and see if I can get enough thread engagement to make me happy to at least trust it for the trip down to Moab. If not, I have no choice. I'm looking at another set of gears. So I'm kind of at a crossroads of what I'm going to do with this, but just goes to show you we're all human. It's just this one sucks. This one really, really sucks. I was on a roll getting stuff done, and then you just end up with something like this. So I don't know. Let me see if I can clean those up. We'll see what goes on. I cut off the end of the pinion, and that is at full torque. My pinion preload is there. You can see I'm missing about, a thread maybe there. I think this will hold. I opted to put on the old pinion nut, which is usually something I don't do, but I added a crap ton of red Loctite. So like I said, this is a short-term solution for a long-term project. It's a short-term project for a long-term, I don't know. I don't even know what the hell I'm trying to say, but you know what? This is going to get me by, I think. And if not, worst case scenario is I have to warranty my own crap. Gears are all wrapped up. Now, as you guys saw in the time lapse there, I had this carrier or this locker in and out probably a dozen times. I had 0 starting shim stacks to go off of. I just had to do everything by trial and error and feel. I got it all knocked out. I got the pattern back to matching what the original pattern was, along with the actual backlash, which was surprising. So anyway, I got all of that done. Now, since this is a new housing, I didn't have an ARB hole that I needed to relocate. So what I did is I just chose to put it off to the side here, and it's not without thought. So when you look at that, let me get my truss here. My truss is going to go roughly right there. So you can see how that line comes out. It clears everything, and I'll be able to take that line and run it up along the control arm and down the frame rail. So that is without, or not without significant consideration on where I wanted to put that thing. It's nice and clean on the inside. It's out of the way of everything, clears the ring gear. Nothing is in the way or rubbing up against anything else. So I have that dialed in. Now, one of the things, I think I'm going to attach that video. I have to figure out how to do this, but one of the things I managed to do when I was doing my final assembly, after I finally got everything done the way I wanted, I managed to put on a wrong thread pitch pinion nut. And I'll show you the pictures of what that looks like, but it screwed on a couple threads. I'm like, cool, got my impact gun, went to town, ends up being the wrong thread pitch. Galled up the first several rows of threads, I had to cut them off. I came back with the old pinion nut and I was able to get it on, but as you can see right here, I had to cut off enough that I have one thread that is not showing there. Now, I don't think that's a big deal, but as you can see, I went ahead and just threw a couple tack welds in there to hold that in place, make sure that thing doesn't back off. I added a ton of red Loctite to it. I just need this ring and pinion to get through a handful of trails down to Moab before I do my auto swap. And then once I do the auto swap, I'm going to new gears anyway to match that. And there's an outside chance I might get that done before Moab, but for right now, this is where I'm at with that axle. So now, before we move on to burning in the truss and all that, because that'll be done on the mid-arm portion of this, what I need to do is get the shafts in there and get the brakes done. Now remember, I am doing a caliper flip, so I'm swapping calipers from side to side, and we are using, it's a kit from Black Magic Brakes. It's a caliper flip kit. And it is an incredible kit to see what you have here. Let me pull this out for you so you can see. So basically what this kit does is this allows you to flip your caliper side to side. And what that does, it gets the brackets out of the way for when you do an outboard. This is everything that comes in that kit. I have a separate video already on how to install this, but I'm going to go over it here again just so you guys can see. What it does, it gets that caliper out of the way for when you outboard your shocks. It's really, really slick. And to be honest with you, when you hook up the parking brake cables using this, it actually, the brakes work better. I don't understand it, but they work better, and it's just really, really cool. So that's what we have coming up next. Axle already out of the Jeep. It only took me about 20 minutes to get these hooked up. So as you can see there, you got your caliper flipped. So the bracket now is on the front side of the axle tube, and your parking brake lever right behind here now connects to this bracket. So everything's kind of backwards there, but with the way this is set up, it gives you extra leverage, and your parking brake actually works better than it did stock. Really ingenious idea from Black Magic Brakes and the Wizard. The guy is just something else with this stuff. So really cool install and very affordable too. So if you're going to do an outboard, I highly encourage you to do this mod. I am now at a crossroads with this axle. And what I mean by that is I've done all of the axle work that I wanted to get into this video. And I need to stop here for a couple of reasons. Let me back up for a second first. My original goal with the axle build portion of this video is I needed to take the internals out of my old axle, install them into the new axle here, which you can see that I did. Part of that was placing an ARB bulkhead fitting that would work with the truss I'm going to put in. My old one came out the top here. That truss is going to be in the way. So I opted to move it forward into the pumpkin and have it come out at a 90-degree angle facing forward. Gives me great access to it that way. The other thing I needed to get done was do the caliper, the brake caliper flip. That's done. So the calipers are done, flip side to side, and the parking brake kit has been installed, and I will link the product links to those in the description below. But anyway, the reason I can't go forward now is after doing the caliper flip, if you're not going to do a mid-arm, then you would need to work your brake lines over here, hook them all back up and get all that done. But because I am doing a mid-arm, I'm going to need to route my brake lines differently anyway. So I don't want to get into that part of it here because I need to get the truss welded on and all that before I decide where those brake lines are going to go. So good place for me to stop with this part of the axle. Let's move on now to the rear portion of the mid-arm install.